Douglas, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's good to be here, and I realize that I am standing between you and a break after a very full day and a lunch break and all of that. So we will move on with this as expeditiously as possible, but I still want to make it interactive. So we'll use the chat if we can to try and pick up questions as they go. I can't necessarily see that. So Agnes, if you guys want to feed me questions as we go, that'll be great, but we'll try and keep it on time. So
yes,
we're going to move
monitoring the questions.
Sorry?
Yes, we are monitoring the questions.
Okay, great. So we're going to move from servant leadership to even yet another less grandiose form of leadership. We're going to talk about where you kind of disappear yourself out of the picture altogether while you're helping your organization improve itself. And the reason for this is because, generally speaking, organizations tend to bypass or tend to create resistance, and project management is not immune from that. So given that you're still processing your lunch, we won't have a picture of an actual accident, but let's just imagine for a minute that you're in an accident and you're grievously injured and you're bleeding and maybe you got some major gashes or something, and the paramedics come up and they start looking at you and they go, you have a skin blemish there on your leg. That could be a potential skin cancer. I think maybe we'll take a biopsy and have this sent over to the cancer center and have them take a look at that. You're going to sit there and go, yeah, that might be a good idea. But meanwhile, hey, people, I need you to fix where my arm is bleeding here, because it's not going to do any good to get to the cancer center and save your life for the next 30 years if you don't survive long enough to get there. And quite often, when you have an organization that needs an improvement, they know they need an improvement, but they're really having difficulty letting the day-to-day get out of their way. So we're going to talk about how to deal with that. So it's not just about not doing best practices. I've done a ton of best practices. And before I talk about myself too much, I guess I'll just speak to you as a head rather than a graphic. But I've got a ton of certifications. I'm a PGMP. I'm a PMP. I'm a SAFE program consultant, so I can train people on SAFE methodology. I'm a black belt in Lean Six Sigma. I'm DoD, DOIA, and all the rest of it, right? So I got all the certifications. That is not really the issue when it comes down to doing the right thing. It's not that I'm opposed to using best practices, but you have to know when to use them and why. And several of my books are along that line. Is if the organization does not accept your ideas, then it doesn't really matter how good they are. So this is a best practice. If you want to drive with the best drivers and to win competitive situations like this, you're going to do what these guys are doing. Anybody online know what they're doing here? What is this tactic that they're using here? Anyone know? This is called drafting, isn't it? You see this in ice skating, speed skating too. They're getting right in behind each other in order to break the wind stream from the other cars so theirs can go a little bit faster with less air resistance and use less fuel and so on and so forth. The best drivers in the world do it in the most competitive situations in order to win. Well, if that's what makes a best practice, is this something that is for you? Remember what we said here. Best practices are for people who are good at what they do in order to be the best. And even if you personally are the best, the people around you may or may not be ready for your level of best practice. Instead, you're going to get something more like that if you take this home and try it on the Beltway. Because setting aside the possibility that you're not the best driver in the world, certainly the people around you are not going to be used to whatever maneuver you're going to pull, and they're not prepared for it. And that's why you see organizations flushing money down the drain on these enormous transformation and process type engagements that don't seem to go anywhere. And it's why when they get a prescription for something that is licensed to work, and PMI has a great deal of credibility and stock in the idea that its methodologies work. There are millions of us around the world, but yet organizations are resisting doing it. And why is that? Well, frankly, because they've had some bad experiences with this kind of change experience before. See, they're not really worried about the fact that they're not PMBOK compliant. When managers are worried in an organization, this is what they're thinking. They're frustrated. They're confused about what it is they're supposed to be doing. There are work groups that are in conflict with each other. They're having difficulty delivering. They want a solution to that. And what they want really is they want some help. But you are selling your professional structure, your framework, your PMBOK, your Scrum methodology, your SAFe methodology, all of those things. These are frameworks. And and I know that if you actually did them properly, that the organization would in fact resolve many of its difficulties. But if you focus on the fact that you're selling something that looks like this, when they wanted a round thing that floats, you're going to have a miscommunication. So rather than focusing on the framework and how fancy it can be, what I've found in many organizations is you got to go back to the ABCs. Now, in first aid, one of the ways of looking at ABC is clear the air, stop the bleeding, and control shock. And this is a framework too. And like project management, for example, it's got many variants. So cardiologists will give you a different version of ABC from paramedics, will give you different versions from military medics, and so on and so forth. So even within the accepted framework, there are variants to it. And in business, we also have an ABC, where A means clear the air, and we'll talk about each one of these things. B is to stop the bleeding, cure the immediate problem. And then C is to control the shock of change. Now, in the limited time that we have, we can talk about why you want to do this stuff and what you need to do, but how to do it takes quite a long time. A lot of it involves practice too. So we can always continue the conversation later on if you want. So I'm not promising to teach you how to do everything that we need to do, but at least you'll know why you should do it and what you should do. So let's start with clearing the air, A. Why you need to do this is you can't assume that the reason that you were hired into this organization or the organization undertook a initiative to begin a project management office or some such thing, that means that the organization knows that that's really what it wants. Sometimes you got to be careful for what you ask for because you might get it. And this happens a lot, especially with PMOs. Don't assume that you know what the solution is either. You need to find out what problem is it that you're expecting to solve before you start deciding what your solutions are. Was addressed in earlier presentations, the business about support from the top. Do you have it? I can tell you that in many occasions you won't. You might get some lip service, but the executives are not going to sign off on any serious investment of political capital on their part until they see that what you're offering is actually going to work. That's kind of catch-22, because many of the standard change frameworks will tell you that it's not going to work unless they have executive cover. But the good news is I've done a lot of this, and quite often you are not going to change the culture by marching in there. You're going to change it from within, and then the executives will discover it and they will adopt it. And there's skepticism. Let's face it, I'm not sure how many organizations you've been in that have tried things like project management, like ITIL, for those of you who are in IT organizations. All sorts of frameworks have come in, and the organization has got very little in return. After millions of dollars being spent 2 years later, you would know it had been there because everybody never wants to hear those words again. But other than that, there was no real benefit. You need to clear the air as to what it is you're supposed to be doing. You know, why do they want to make this change now? Somewhere there's a reason why they decided to do that. What does everybody expect to get out of this? And where do you think you're going to find resistance? Get that up front. And the main thing to understand is, what is this symptom that is making them care? They didn't just wake up one day and decide, hey, let's implement the PMBOK. Something made them decide that they're sick and tired of delivering late, of losing money on contracts, whatever their story is, and they thought that maybe your skill set is the solution. Find out what that symptom is. And how you go about finding this out is look around. Look at their documentation, but listen to what they say. Find out what their core values really are. Are they just transactional and just about the money? Are they really about caring for people, or is that just stuff they put on their vision page on their website? You have to understand that so you don't go into this thinking the wrong things. Find out what needs it is that they have, that they're really feeling. And take a look around and understand how people work and what their organizational network is about. Who are the players, who are not the players? And what you can do with this when you get home to your own organization, look around and ask yourself, what are we doing, particularly stuff we're doing that is annoying? And given my professional training, what is there we could do about that? Where should we be? And then take those gaps and figure out which one's going to work for you. And as we'll see in the next section, start working on that. So take this home and take a look at the difference between what people would like to have happen and what is happening, because that's going to be your fertile ground. The next step is B, to stop the bleeding. And the reason why we want to stop the bleeding is because, as I said, there's no point in engaging in a long-term, very complex framework institution if, in fact, the organization is hurting right now from something else. They don't want to wait 6 months for you to adapt all of your templates to their organizational situation and conduct months worth of training, and they don't really understand what you're talking about anyway. Their real problem is that, for example, they can't seem to get a contract out of their contract office in any reasonable time frame. All right, well, let's deal with that. When you're dealing with it, you'll discover that it's related to 40 other things, which will give you opportunities for bringing your framework in. And the other thing is, particularly if you're external to the organization, solve the problem. Don't recommend. There's nothing worse for an organization. They spend money on a consultant, and after 6 months, they get a recommendation. Work with them to solve it, and then you will be given access to the next points. So what do? Engage with everybody, leverage their pain points, find out what it is that's really annoying them, because they don't want any theory. They want relief from current pain. Leverage that as your way in the door. Treat that problem. In fact, help them treat that problem. Don't do it yourself. Work with them to do it. And together, you can fix a symptom that is really making them care. And it may be only tangentially related to your problem. You know, you may have a contractor who's not performing very effectively. You don't need to implement the whole PMBOK for that. But you could work with that program manager or the contract owner to figure out why the reporting is not working and why the vendor is not providing the right kind of information, and get the information that's necessary and have things start coming in on time. And people look around and go, wow, you solved my pain. You must have some good ideas. So gather information, collaborate with your colleagues, and don't make it about you, make it about them. But meanwhile, shape your solution, right? So the problem you're going to solve may be not squarely in the middle of one of your PMBOK skill sets, but use a tool that is coming out of your PMI toolbox. And as you implement that, as we all know, all of these things are linked together, other pieces of the organization will start to come into line. So here's what you can do at home. Go ahead and gossip. I know we say it's not good, but do. Hang around the water cooler, talk to people, do whatever you need to do to find out what it is that is really annoying people that they would like your help with, and then offer to help. Make a list of the various things. Figure out which of your project management tools would address those exact problems, and then pick one and work with that person to fix that problem. Having done that, you got to control the shock of the treatment, even this limited treatment you're going to give. Because even the idea that you and your colleagues come up with is creating uncertainty and something different for everybody else. And people just don't like that, even if they kind of know in the back of their head that this would be a good idea. It's a disruption to their routine, and there are a great many people in your workplace that don't like to have their routines disrupted. Another thing to recognize is that your great ideas are just ideas. It's them that has to do the work. So you got to make it palatable to them, and you got to not overload it. Let it work first and then make it fancy. Identify clearly what's broken, communicate what's broken, communicate how the thing that you're doing is fixing what's broken. That way people can see the small win that you created. And then you got to be careful of backsliding. So what you got to do is walk the talk. If you're the PMO and you're not maintaining meeting minutes and you tell everybody else they should, if you're the PMO and you don't have a plan and you don't have a schedule for rolling out your own organization or for managing your organization, it's not going to go very well when you start telling these project teams or even business-oriented teams that they've got to do stuff and they don't see you doing it. Maintain the momentum so when you get a small win, capitalize on it and turn it around and say, you know, while we were doing that, I had this other idea of this other problem you kept mentioning, and I believe we could fix that too. And start another small initiative to fix another problem. And in so doing, you will first of all prevent going back to the way things were, and you'll keep things moving forward, because this is going to be your biggest problem, is going back to the way things were.
Douglas,
yes, ma'am.
There is an important comment here from Victoria Davidson. She points out that some organizations haven't figured out how to articulate their pain points. Any clue how then would you control the shock?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, don't count on top level support to make these things happen. Even if you got hired to come in as a consultant or a new senior manager to put in PM practices, those are executive level words, and maybe they have a pain point, but the people at the operator level don't necessarily get that. Mm-hmm. So hang around the water cooler, listen to what people are talking about in the meetings, hear what the things are that are really frustrating them, even if it's not squarely in your lane, and make your list based on that. Those are the pain points, not, oh, we need to do a job of portfolio management, or we need to be compliant with our Klinger-Cohen, or we need to be compliant with Sarbanes-Oxley. I mean, those are true statements, but those are too big for the average person on the mid to lower levels to really do anything about. So find out what's really bothering them and work with them on that.
Awesome. Thank you.
How you do this is you over-communicate, you build on your small wins, publicize success, and not about you, but the things we fixed. Hey, guys, remember how we could never get a resource available when we wanted to because nobody's really sure what the load was, and we put in this prioritization scheme that all of the program managers agreed was the scheme because maybe an organization doesn't have a good portfolio management process, but the program managers agreed among themselves. We got to have some way of knowing when the resource is coming. So let people know, this team, we succeeded in doing this, and then do it again. So with the pain point that you picked for your at-home scenario, take a look at, well, what exactly is your process? What about it that you're going to fix, right? So you've come up with a new idea, a new way of doing things. Why did we set it up that way? And then look at, can they get around it? Because again, remember in this control phase, we're talking about stopping the backsliding. And as soon as people find a way around your new process, they're going to go back to the old way, not because there's anything wrong with your new process, but because the old way was comfortable. They knew that. So take a look at your solution and start making it more robust as you go. What's important while you're doing this is it's great to help people. It's really neat to have their pain points go away and do all that. But don't get so caught up in what you see right around you, the desolate situation of rocks and stones that you're trying to plant seeds in. And this is going to be a long slog through this desert. But do not lose sight of where you're trying to go. And it's very easy to do. You have to know what your overall framework is that we talked about, so that as you're taking these little steps and you're whumping the elephant with your little stick and getting it to move in a certain direction, that it keeps moving in the right direction. So let's recap the important parts of this. You're selling a framework. It's got lots of stuff. It's very complex, a lot of interconnected parts, and it really would work once you get it working. But the people you're talking to, what they want is a life ring. They feel like they're drowning. They're kicking like crazy trying to stay above the surface, and they just want a life raft to hang on to, and it does not have to be very elaborate or fancy. And if you succeed in saving their life at this point, they will be grateful to you later and let you do other stuff. So the ABC approach then is to clear the air, make sure you understand the problem before you start fixing it. Stop the bleeding, meaning find a problem that people really, really want to have fixed and will welcome your assistance, and use your PM toolkit to help them fix their problem. And then once you have found a solution for it, make sure that we minimize the tendency to go back to doing it the old way as soon as somebody's not looking anymore. So in these few minutes, we've talked about why you're often going to need to take this ABC solution and incrementally build your capabilities, rather than starting with enterprise class training on PMI compliant PMO processes. And some ideas for what you can do to actually implement one or two of those steps yourself in your organization if you're having difficulty getting change accepted. And again, we can continue the conversation to talk about how you might be able to do that, how to deal with certain situations, and so on. I got a deal for you because Silver Spring is my favorite chapter because they've invited me to talk here several times. Just for today, actually this week really, but we're on deep discount on Hotspots, which I have to admit is a framework kind of a book. Basically, everything you want to know about risk management, how you apply it all across the enterprise instead of just being that little square thing on your project management plan that immediately gets forgotten about. So you can get it from Amazon, and it's 99 cents for the rest of the week. So now's the time. And if you want to get a free copy for review, then you can contact me for that. So here is my contact information. You're more than welcome to do that. And let's talk about you. Do we have anything in the chat at the moment or in the questions?
No questions thus far, but there are some important key items here brought to us by some of the participants. Terry Hyman was saying, ironically, she's seeing more water cooler discussions by tools like Slack and Jabber within her organization taking place versus face-to-face. Anita was also saying something that it is difficult to pick up on scuttlebutt or gossip that happens at the office when we are, working 100% remote. No water coolers available right now.
Yeah, well, no, wait, let's slow down on that one. Unless your organization doesn't have chats and stuff, or Teams, or any of those other tools like that, even like we're doing here in this meeting, right? I have to say that I've sat in a ton of meetings where that kind of social media kind of conversation is going on, even while the meeting's happening on the Zoom screen or wherever. So don't discount that. It's there. In fact, even before COVID happened, I used to start seeing that where people had their cell phones out and they were texting each other in the meeting, in the middle of the live meeting, because they didn't want people to hear what their comments were. So, I mean, there's an electronic water cooler out there. You just got to tune into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nate is also adding up to that. He's setting up virtual chat channels for his team so that they could have those water cooler socializations, which is, I think, is important as we talk about remote work. Yeah,
and by the way, don't be misled by all that. So remember that the visual medium is much, much more powerful than audio, which is much, much more powerful than being told something, right? So if you're in a web meeting and all you're looking at, as we're doing right now, for example, is the screen with my static information on it, it's really easy for somebody to get on their cell phone and start texting.
Mm-hmm.
And their eyes are now on their texting, which means that their eyes have overcome their ears, so they're not hearing what you're saying. And they're focusing on their actual text. So as a result, basically the screen is blah, blah, blah in the background, even if it's a meeting, and while people are really focused on that phone. So be aware of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is also a question from Wendy. How do you help someone open up if they are resistant to share? I suppose you mean change?
Yeah, so that's a good one. Remember, what this is about is you're coming in with a new way of thinking, and you don't want to shove it all down people's throats at the same time. So you're trying to find places where people will welcome your assistance. And, every organization I've been to, we used to say in the Army that the best assignment you ever had is the one you just left, and the worst one you ever had is the one you're in right now. There is no shortage of griping and people complaining about whatever. So figure out what people are complaining about. It might take you 2 or 3 weeks, but believe me, it doesn't take long for people to get around to complaining if you're talking to them. So if you then start talking to them about, well, what happens with that? How does that work? And, is there something I can do in my role that we could maybe take care of that problem? Or what if we did a little exercise together to try and do this? You'd be amazing. People are receptive. They're not opening up their inner secrets. They're basically agreeing to work with you to take something off that they're pounding the table that's been a problem for a long time. I remember one of the times we did this one time. We have an organization where, to be honest, the CIO was pretty wishy-washy, and basically he would agree to whatever anybody came into his office and asked him for, which meant that any guidance he gave was only as good as the next secret meeting that he had. And then he would never tell anybody what he had agreed on. So all of us as senior managers were looking around and go, okay, so what is going on here? And we finally decided among ourselves that, look, if we can't get priorities from the top, we're just going to get together. We're going to look at the work that's on our plate, and we're going to agree amongst ourselves as to what's priority. Because if we have a key engineer or somebody like that, we got to figure out when they're going to be available and when we can possibly call on them And, you know, you can just see the tentacles of this starting to expand as well. If I'm going to do that, that means I got to define my project in such a way that I will actually know when I need key resources, you know, and all these discussions then started happening, and all from the managers agreeing that, yeah, you know, we could do some simple things to help make this problem go away. So it's not going to be, and Anita, I take your point, but this isn't going to be about them opening up their personal kimono. This is just about things that are really bothering them about the way work is getting in their way and working on that. I guarantee you, you'll have no shortage of candidates.
There's another question here. How do you apply ABC in agile or ever-changing environment? Goals, objectives, priorities are always changing.
Oh, well, I'm glad you said that. So I'm going to give you a piece of heresy that comes from me. You're more than welcome to quote me. Agile is a thing for inside of projects. Not that Agile necessarily recognizes the existence of projects, but at the program level and above, Agile is irrelevant. It's simply a means of how to deliver the project. So I've been working with an organization, I won't say which one, but I have been working with them. And their challenge is that they simply refuse to give any kind of top-down guidance, whatever. Well, it doesn't matter if you're Agile or not. You can't put a team of 5 people out there or 3 or 4 teams of 5 people out there and have them just self-actualize their way to a successful business conclusion. You know, unless you're doing something tiny like a web app or, a cell phone app or something, anything substantial, there has to be some kind of top-down guidance. So if the situation that you're in fact, I have an artifact that if you contact me later on, I can give you about different organizational situations you're in. And I think I made it available for the conference, if the conference has like a library thing. Where if you're in that kind of situation, you may be solving the wrong problem by trying to impose PM on top of Agile. What you may need to be doing is working with the leadership to help them understand why they need to provide some limited level of milestone level guidance to the Agile team, because cowboy coding is cowboy coding, whether you're doing it in Agile or whether you're doing it in Waterfall. There has to be some reason why this team exists in the first place, and the organization owes it to them to give them that direction. If that kind of guidance is back and forth, wishy-washy, and your leadership is changing its mind from week to week as about what's important, your problem is not with your Agile team. And what you got to do is find a way with the leadership team to have a conversation about, well, you know how you're complaining that these people never do anything that you ask them to do? Well, one of the reasons why is because they know good and well you're going to change your mind in a week or two, and they'll have wasted all that time. Maybe we could find a way of laying out a rough roadmap for the next quarter, just a very high level, to give them a fairly stable playing field to work on. And in that way, if they don't do it, now you can hold them accountable.
Right. Thank you so much for that. You do have a lot of nods also for the book. They're appreciative of, I guess, of the discount. Some people have already downloaded them on Amazon. So great.
Thank you.
All right, I think we are ahead of our time. I think this is an excellent conversation that we're having right now. Thank you, Dr. Brown, for giving the presentation of first aid for project management ailments. I think that the ABCs of bypassing resistance and getting your PM practices accepted, you really nail that down, especially for underperforming organizations who are often very, very resistant to any kind of change or anything that needs improvement, because it's too much, too expensive, return on investment isn't that great. I like the fact that you frame your approach in a medical way. You have the framework of the ABC. A, you clear the air, which means you all have to agree on a problem. And then B, you gotta stop the bleeding. You solve the problems that are hurting right now in the immediate term, as opposed to, it's a time to like step back, as opposed to like worrying about 10 steps ahead. We need to identify what's happening at the moment that we need to solve. And lastly, the C, control the shock of change, which I think is a little bit more long term. It means being ready for change. And this approach, definitely the ABC, in summary, is very important. And this concept is very applicable to whatever is happening right now. Given this pandemic, you are faced with project closures, programs struggling with revenues, for example. And I think that it's important to establish your ABC framework.